My name is Hadas. I am a correspondent with CNN, and I am incredibly honored and excited to be here with Dorothy, who I do not need to introduce to all of you. One thing I will say, if somehow you have made the mistake to have not watched Dorothy's MacTaggart lecture from last night, I would ask you currently to get up, leave this room, and go watch it on your phone. Anybody? Okay, so everybody's seen it. Great. Before we get started, though, I would like to note that we have questions that you can send in via the app. Please send them in. I have a very fancy iPad here that I hopefully will not break while trying to use it. Please submit your questions. We will also have a microphone passed around towards the end because I know many of you probably have a lot of questions for Dorothy, as I do. So excited to be here with you. Dorothy, thank you very much. You've had quite the last 12 hours or so ever since the speech. I mean, go on radio, on the Today Show. You just did half an hour with Kay Burley. So quite a good reaction. So my first question for you, though, is how do you do it? How do you, as you said last night, survive in this industry? How do you keep going as a woman, as an executive at this point in your career?
By ignoring nearly everybody, especially bosses, and doing as much as I can what I want to do, although I always know I have to, every time I get a new boss, I have to do something for them, but it's because I really believe in what I do, and I just love it.
So how do you know, I'm a woman sort of on the early end of my career. What advice do you have for somebody like me who, I don't have children yet, but I plan to, I want to be running a newsroom similar to what you're doing? What do you say to me on how to do it before I get started on all of that?
Well, I always say, don't forget to have a baby, because I nearly forgot to have a baby. And I was like the woman on the postcard. And then I went, oh, my goodness. And I was very lucky to have a baby using my own egg when I was 45. But that doesn't happen to most people. And I think that's one of the key things we have to talk to young women about. And one of the problems at the moment is that older women in companies are worried about talking to women and saying, oh, do you want to have a baby? Because they're worried that could make it look as if they are prejudiced against women having babies, when actually they probably mean the opposite. So I say to young women, do you know how fertile you are? Have you done a fertility test? Because I think you should do a fertility test so you know how many years it's likely you have. You need to know what your situation is. And then a lot of young women don't know anything about different forms of childcare. So, I was lucky enough to be well enough off to have a live-in nanny. Most people don't have that. And to my surprise, I find that a lot of women, young women, don't even know there is such a thing as a childminder. So, and I talk to them about nanny shares. And so I think that's really important because women, my mother's generation, it was all about, like my mother was in the civil service. And when you got married, it was the law that you had to give up your job. And that was the same for teachers. So I think we went from that to women of my generation who didn't want to be like that. And I deliberately didn't do a degree that could be taught in a school so that I could never become a teacher because, my grandmother was a teacher, my great aunts were teachers, my sisters were teachers, my aunt was a teacher. And I thought, then I'll never be tempted to be a teacher. But then in some ways we went the opposite way. And when I used to work on a paper in the north of England, and when I went to interview older women, they would say to me, are you courting like that? And I'd go, it's not like that for us, we just do what we want. But actually there was a sense they were saying, think about where you want your life to go. And then in terms of your career, as much as possible, do what you really want to do. And if you're working somewhere boring, just get out, because you'll never in my view, make a really good career if you're not doing something that you really like.
This is actually a good time to ask a question we just got in. What could the industry be doing better to support single parents?
Well, of course, the big thing is that the industry is becoming more and more freelance, and therefore you don't have maternity rights. And for me, I worked up till the Friday and gave birth on the Tuesday, and then I went back to work after 5.5 weeks. So, I don't know the answer about that issue of lack of maternity rights there. But I do think we need to talk about it a lot more and support each other a lot more. And then in terms of women who have staff jobs, and that may well be the minority now, I'm not absolutely sure because I couldn't find very up-to-date statistics, then, we need really good flexible working. And of course, we need to change all men, which is easy.
Speaking of men, last night you made, quite an announcement saying that there are people still out there, some of your predecessors from the speech, possibly people in the audience last night, who have sexually harassed or assaulted women. But you didn't name names. You obviously know names. Why aren't you naming names?
I think it's up to those women themselves whether they want to come forward as victims and go to the police or go to employers or state it publicly. I don't think it's for me, well, I'm sure it is not for me to start naming names when the women who were victims of those people have decided not to name names. But one reason I said last night, you know who you are, and so do I, is that if there are men who don't have the morality to behave properly towards women, we've got to frighten them into behaving properly towards women. And we've got to say to them, and you thought you got away with it for 20 or 30 years, mate. Well, stop now. Certainly, and you may well find anyway that your past catches up to you with you. But I would say to any dirty bastard now, just don't do it because we'll somehow get you.
So, what kind of steps have you taken at Channel 4 to try to encourage an atmosphere where women feel comfortable coming forward and where men or women, anybody, doesn't feel comfortable to engage in that sort of behavior?
Well, I think at Channel 4, like any major employer, there is all sorts of training now in how people have to behave towards each other. But, and I'm not saying that training necessarily means that everything is perfect, but I think the fact that a lot more women are bosses makes a difference. The fact that I myself talk about the issue, and previously I've said how a producer said he had to come round to my house for some reason. This is when I was freelance, and I sort of felt suspicious, but thought, well, I can't put my finger on why, I'm being suspicious here. And he came round to my house and assaulted me really, really unpleasantly, and it was really frightening. And I thought, if I go to the police, it's my word against his, and they'll say he came round to my house. So I thought, oh, well, I was a victim. But quite a number of years later, not too many, I became the editor of Dispatches and had an event, maybe in a room about this size, and this man turned up. And maybe I wouldn't have said anything if he hadn't put his hand up. And he went, "Hello, Dorothy." He had a leer on his face. And he said, "You probably don't remember me with this leering face." And I said, in front of a room about this size, on the contrary, how could I forget a man who sexually assaulted me in my own home? Yes! And he sat down again, and this is literally true. He's never been seen since. I didn't top him, but I don't know where he went. But he certainly never turned up again at Channel 4. And, you know, and I tell women that, and, you know, it's important that we talk about it. And I can tell you, we do talk about it in our department, and we make films about it. But I've also commissioned a film about men being assaulted by women. You know, this is not about being sexist or only thinking of one gender. This is about protecting everybody. In smaller independent production companies, women are less protected, and, you know, young women still tell me of, you know, these incidents where you're coming near the end of your contract and the boss invites you out to dinner, doesn't assault you, but, you know, it's really not an appropriate thing to happen. And, you know, it's like the example I gave last night of try to reverse the situation. Supposing I suddenly asked some young bloke to dinner, I mean, I would feel ridiculous. You know, hello, Fred, you know, let's go out to a lovely dinner. I mean, and then I sit there going, and how are you liking it, Fred, at our place? Want to stay longer, Fred? I mean, like, and that's what these women say happens to them. So I think men shouldn't just think about whether they're behaving badly. They should also think about whether they're just embarrassing themselves. And they shouldn't invite people to dinner. You know, there are other ways of eating.
I want to ask, though, about redemption. You know, so you noted how some of these men may have done bad things, but they've done some amazing work. So on the one hand...
That's not redemption. That's just like there's bad and there's good. You don't get redemption from being a bad guy by doing something good.
Should there be any way, I guess, back in? There's an issue right now in the United States. There was a journalist, Mark Halperin, who was accused of sexual harassment, lost his job, but is now writing a book and getting it published. And there's a lot of anger that somehow within just 2 years or so. But on the other hand, there is expertise there. Where should these people be shunned from the industry completely, or
well,
should
it depends what they did and how bad it was. But, you know, in principle, I believe in the rehabilitation of offenders. You know, if they admit what they did and want to write a book, you know, My Life as a Dirty Bastard, I won't myself be buying it, but others might.
This is great. Something else that's been brought up, and I will not in any way connect this previous topic to what we're currently talking about, is politicians being bad as well. But you made a lot of headlines today about how we as journalists need to be calling out politicians who are liars. Why do you think the media, and I'm thinking of specific names in the media because all around the world we're dealing with this right now, like when do you call somebody a liar or a politician a liar when isn't it the whole trope that all politicians lie all the time? What's the line?
Well, I think, honestly, people who say all politicians lie, I think that takes a dim view of politicians. I have a much higher view of politicians. I genuinely think that most people who go into politics, yeah, they like to show off, but also, you know, they've got an idea in their minds that they want to make the world a better place, that they have something to offer, they have a sense of public service. And I know politicians, and I don't altogether have a bad view of them. I think what's true is that we don't expect politicians to tell us every truth. So I don't expect a politician to say, really, I'm quite boring and I haven't got many policies that are very good and I just think I'll probably get nowhere, and if I do, it'll be an accident. I don't expect that. But what I don't accept at all is that they should lie. They must not lie. So you know, at the moment, our government is trying to negotiate some sort of deal. Let the Lord help them. I don't expect them to say, hello, Dorothy, I'd like to share with you every detail of my discussion with Angela Merkel. It's not, I know they have to have secrets, and I know they don't want to tell me all their difficulties, but they shouldn't tell me a lie. And then if they do tell me a lie, partly because we're British, although I think it's a problem around the world, but I think it is a problem for us, we find it really difficult to actually say to somebody, you're telling a lie. I had somebody from Syria living in my house, and if we disagreed, I would say something like, I don't think it's quite like that. And he didn't realise that that meant that's rubbish, because I couldn't quite say that. So I think we need to, and I gave the example of Andrew Marr saying to Penny Mordaunt that what she said was strange. And the problem with saying it was strange is that the viewer might just think it was strange. But what he meant, it was strange that she was talking rubbish. So I'm not saying we should always use the word liar. I think we shouldn't rule it out, but I think we should say that's simply not true when something isn't true. Because otherwise, the viewer won't know, and also the politicians have got away with it. And I think when we see that we have got a Prime Minister who is a known liar, who's admitted his own lies, who lost his first job in journalism because he lied, and we see a man over the ocean who just thinks he can lie whenever he wants, then we've got to say, hang on, we're not going to accept that. And, 30 years ago, if you'd said to me, one day it will be controversial to say that politicians shouldn't lie, I'd go, oh, don't be ridiculous, because politicians accept that they ought not to lie. And my concern now is that we're losing this concept of the central primacy of truth. If we don't think that truth is at the centre of everything, and I have a degree in philosophy, so I know you can never get perfect truth, but if we don't accept, both as politicians and journalists, that that's what we're aiming at, then we're lost.
So when it comes to getting these politicians on our air, to actually confront them, and they're refusing, as you said, to come on air, what practical steps do you think organizations should take to call them out on it, or to, should we be banding together and boycotting these people?
Well, we can't boycott them because they're boycotting us. That would be like a double boycott. I think the first thing is that we have to talk about it, and we have to tell the public that this is what they are doing, that there is a really major problem here. Our Prime Minister has not done a major interview or a major press conference. That is extraordinary. And if we look again across the ocean, we see that Donald Trump thinks that he doesn't have to do these White House briefings anymore, or sit down with political journalists that he really doesn't like and have long interviews with them. So we can see where they're getting some of these ideas. And we need to, first of all, talk about it, inform the public that this is happening, inform them that what looks like you're really seeing a politician isn't what you think it is. So every night on TV, practically, it seems to me, I see Boris Johnson, clearly not a man with much to do, I would think. He's in hospitals, he's in hospices, I thought this was what we had the Queen for, visiting these places. I don't know why he's doing it. Maybe Prince Andrew's not available anymore. But, we've got to point out to the public that that's not real access. You're not really seeing these politicians called to account. And also, yes, we have to unite. We have to, all talk about it and all say it's unacceptable. And we have to empty chair people. So when we did our debate, we put his podium right in the middle, although that was, of course, because of alphabetical order. And naturally, and we left it empty so that people could constantly notice he's not there. That's not being vindictive, that's informing people. And sometimes I think we have to say, if so-and-so was here, here are the questions that we would have asked. I mean, this morning they had a fantastic person on the Today programme, me. And then they had David Davis. And who, in fairness, said he liked me. I've not lived that down all day. And David Davis was asked at some length what was going to happen if we had no deal Brexit. And he told us not to worry. And but this was quite a lengthy interview, but it was with somebody not in power. Now, I really think that lots of people are genuinely worried about what is going to happen. They have the right to hear their politicians tell them. David Davis said, I didn't need to worry, but I would like to hear a leading politician who is in government come on the radio and be questioned in detail and say whether or not I have to worry. I'm not well at the moment and have to take a very specific drug. And I read that thing in the paper saying that drugs might not be there. If I don't take the drug that I take, I can go blind. I mean, I need to know I can get that drug. I need to hear from the politicians and not just from David Davis. I think it's really, really important.
You said yesterday that you decry sort of the state of television and how we're no longer doing these ambitious sort of projects looking at what we could be pushing society forward. So if you had all the money and all the resources in the world, what kind of piece or series would you commission?
Well,
what's an undercover
obviously
story?
she doesn't commission programs because she wouldn't expect me to give all my great ideas in front of all my rivals.
So give your worst idea.
So I'll give you a couple of really bad ideas. That could be really good, couldn't it? I mentioned two specifics yesterday that are obvious. One is climate change, where, there was a nice thing by David Attenborough about plastics. But I think if we are to really do something about climate change, we probably need to change the way that capitalism operates. And we need to talk about that. And what are the ways in which we could change the concept of constant growth being a virtue in order to save the planet, while not making particularly people who don't have very much money really suffer economically and make people in developing countries not have the great developments that we've got. Those are really big issues to which I don't know all the answers. So obviously I'm not giving you any program ideas, but it's really huge things like that we should be discussing. And as I said, I think young people are really interested in that sort of thinking, in really big thinking. It's often older people who sort of accept the way that we live. Not all old people, some of us are quite forward-thinking and plan to be alive when things get better. But we need to be really ambitious in our thinking.
How is the news industry or the television industry covering Brexit in your mind? Is it too anti-Brexit, as some of the politicians say they have been, or are we covering it appropriately from all sides?
Covering it is very difficult, as you will all know watching it, because we don't know what's going to happen. And I think I think there is some really excellent and intelligent coverage. A lot of the time we're just dealing with what politicians have said about each other, and that's really important. But and I don't know the answer to this. How can we better cover some of the underlying issues without sort of making things up? I mean, a lot of people have suggested to me, please commission me to make a programme saying what will happen if there's a no-deal Brexit. And I say, well, if you find that out, I mean, we'd all like to know, but I think the fact is we don't really know. And like this thing of not knowing makes it a peculiarly hard thing to cover. And the politicians aren't coming on for us to question them. That is a real, it's a real deficit in our democracy. I want to hear exactly what Boris Johnson says. I want to hear exactly what Jeremy Corbyn says at length. I am genuinely interested in what they have to say, not just as a journalist, but as a person living in this country. And if they don't come on, we can't cover it properly.
I want to open it up because I know that we have only a few more minutes. So if anybody in the audience has any questions for Dorothy, as you can tell, she's very open to answering anything. Anybody out there? Yes.
So Dorothy, do you think it would be a good strategy for somebody standing against Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn to actually be the person who is on every interview show, who's in every kind of local radio newsroom, who makes a big point, picking up on what you've highlighted, of being out there and being the person who is answerable to the public?
So I don't quite understand what you mean there.
We can't force the MPs onto the stage. We can't force them to do interviews with us. What we can do is encourage a brilliant candidate, to take that tack, that they just show them up. They get that message across to the public, which is why it's so important to talk about.
Yeah,
Actually.
I myself, it has often been suggested that we do a film where we put a candidate up of some sort. I don't myself approve of us entering directly into the democratic system. I think it's more for us as journalists to be making that point that they haven't come on. And one problem that we face is when we have other people on, but we don't have the main politician on, then we get complaints that we're not duly impartial. But you're really struggling to be duly impartial when the main politicians won't come on. That's why the Today programme, I assume, had David Davis, because you've got to find some sort of parallel person. But I think it's more for us to be making that point about they're not here than for us to be encouraging any candidate. I don't feel it's for me to encourage anybody to stand for any...
I suppose the point I'm making is, as you've said, the programmes still have to be commissioned because a clever candidate will actually use the opportunity to show that this is the way politicians should behave.
Well, yes, I mean, but if they're just, I mean, as I say, I just don't think that we should be involved in encouraging candidates to stand.
It's just finally, the alternative is, what is the alternative? You can't force people to do interviews. It's clearly a political strategy. You can't force them into the studio. So what is the alternative?
Well, there's not one alternative. I think, as I say, we need to unite and tell people. we need to engage the public in this, and also we need to engage other politicians in this. We had Ken Clark was on Krishnan Guru Murthy's podcast, and he made the point that when he was in the cabinet under Margaret Thatcher and John Major, it was simply expected as a matter of course that he would go onto TV at length and be scrutinised and explain and justify policies. Where are all the other politicians in this who for years, well, this is all relatively recent, who for years and years did appear on TV and did go on the Today programme? We should be encouraging them to come out and them to pressurise their own parties. And we do need to engage the public. We mustn't make the public think, oh, this is just us complaining because a politician doesn't come on. Honestly, it's not about that. I genuinely believe that if the politician doesn't come on, our democracy doesn't work. That's what the fourth estate is about. You can't just have three estates. You need us as well. In evil regimes, the first thing that they do is they either arrest or kill the journalists. What's happening here is they've not arrested us, they've not killed us, they're trying to ignore us. And the effect is not absolutely the same, but it's a similar effect, that it means that they are not being held to account. It's the same principle. And the fact that these two men were journalists is so ironic.
Well, I think, unfortunately, although we could keep talking forever, that we are out of time. So everybody, please, could you give a huge round of applause to Dorothy?
Thank you.